Please join me in prayer. Holy Spirit, come into our lives in power, so that we may not seek power over one another, but rather seek to be empowered by you. Amen. I don't know where it started for me. I can't remember a time in my whole life, even as a little kid, when I wasn't skeptical of authority. I've just had this intuition my whole life, and I know that this made me a very interesting person to parent for my parents when I was a kid. This skepticism for authority. And it also made things like school pretty difficult. Sometimes I had a lot of trouble remaining in school. And, for some reason I chose a career that required 21 years of school. But this is an odd choice for me by many measures. But I've always had this feeling, this intuition, that I should be skeptical of authority. And I think of course it seems reasonable to me. So as we've talked about, you can rationalize anything. But it seems like a basic orientation that I have. Some people feel comfortable in a position of authority or in a position like under an authority figure. And some people feel uncomfortable in those positions. And I'm one of the second kind. As you may know, my favorite author in the whole world is Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. And he has a wonderful quote about authority that, of course, reinforces what I think. That's why it's so great. Tolkien said in a letter to his son, "The most improper job of any person, even saints, is bossing other people. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity." It's a good opening quote for this one. Now we look at the prophet Amos, the words of the prophet Amos. And it's interesting in this context, getting a sermon from someone who's skeptical of authority, because Amos is someone who is speaking to authority. And he is speaking with authority. He is speaking, when we read the prophets in the Bible, almost all of them, in almost every case, and I say almost because I didn't read every prophetic text before this, it could be every. But in almost every case, the prophet is speaking to people in authority. Speaking to rulers and the powerful and the influential and the wealthy. And so Amos is doing that. He is speaking to people who have power over him, power over others, and he is speaking with power, with authority. Perhaps he has a more balanced view of it than I do. So what I'll be looking at is how these texts from Amos and from Colossians help us understand power, understand authority. Amos is a herdsman by his own description, not a great poet, not a mystic. And so his visions are pretty direct. Like last week, Amos had a vision of a plumb line, which is like a weight on a string that you use to measure if something is straight up and down. If you don't have like a level because you're in the Bronze Age, you use the plumb line. And so Amos has a vision of a plumb line, which measures whether you are straight up and down, and the vision means that God is measuring Israel with a plumb line, right? It's very direct, one-to-one correlation. This week he has a slightly more odd image, that Amos has a vision of a basket of summer fruit. And as Chris read, God asks, "Amos, what do you see?" And Amos says, "A basket of summer fruit." Which is just odd. I mean, it's like a table setting. It's like a centerpiece. It's a weird image for a prophet to use right before some pretty harrowing text. Like if you were paying attention to what Chris read after the basket of summer fruit, it gets ugly real quick for Israel. Remember, Amos is speaking to people in power. He's warning them. He's conveying a threat. He's talking about God's reckoning. So when we think about ripe fruit, metaphorically in the text, Israel is ripe. Or you could say that God's purposes with regard to Israel, when we get to Amos's text, is ripe. It's about to come to fruition, so to speak. Now, ripe, of course, has another meaning, and sort of a double entendre that wasn't in the text, but I think fits for us. Has anyone used the term ripe to describe someone who needs a shower? Okay, so I want to make sure that it wasn't like just me, it wasn't obscure. Like you say, oh, that's a little ripe. Maybe you should hop in the bath, right? So that also fits. That double entendre fits. That Israel is ripe, and it's also a little bit ripe, right? Because Amos is describing a reckoning by referencing this summer fruit. Now, summer fruit, what is summer fruit? Summer fruit is ripe, and there's only two things that's ever going to happen to summer fruit. One is summer fruit will be devoured. Two is that summer fruit will fall to the ground and rot. Those are the two things that happen to summer fruit. It doesn't last. It either gets eaten up, or it falls to the ground and rots. In both cases, it is destroyed for the purpose of spreading seeds. It's the purpose of fruit. That it is destroyed to spread seeds one way or another. So what is this ripeness that Amos is talking about? He's very specific. He lays out what he thinks is the ripeness of Israel. He describes making the ephod small and the shekel great. He describes using long weights. He describes buying and selling the poor for a pair of sandals. What Amos describes as the ripeness of Israel is what we would say in the modern age is economic exploitation. That is what Amos is describing. Economic exploitation. People who have a lot, squeezing people who don't have very much in order to get what they want. Now, we may not know what an ephod or a shekel are, but we know what that looks like. And for Amos, that is what makes Israel right, is that economic exploitation. And this ripeness and this threat isn't just something that I point out or notice. Has anyone heard of Charles Spurgeon? He's known as the Prince of Preachers, is one of his nicknames. He is widely respected as a preacher, and in all honesty, I skimmed a sermon of Charles Spurgeon's on this same text, because he has long, very long sermons, no page breaks, right? But he had the following in capital letter, as a capital letter heading in his sermon notes. Nations have their ripeness, and when they come to their ripeness, they must be destroyed. It's the Prince of Preachers talking. Wow. Or at the very least, bare minimum, from Amos's text, when a nation comes to its ripeness, it is doomed to God's silence. People will go looking and listening for God, and they will not hear God. They will look for God and not find God when they are right. Paul, in the letter to the Colossians, also talks about authority. He's speaking about authority, maybe not to authority. These letters were pastoral letters handed around among the churches who were kind of, at the time the churches were very fringy. Like Judaism was a pretty large religion, but not the largest by any means, and then Christianity was like a fringe of Judaism. So he's not speaking to the powerful the way that Amos is, but he's speaking about power. And one of the things he says in this letter is that power, or authority, in the form of thrones, dominions, rulers, and powers, is created through Christ and for Christ. The authority and power are created through Christ and for Christ. Now he places Christ before all. He says Christ is at the top. Everything that isn't Jesus, if you're a Christian, is at best second. It's the highest any other claim on you can ever get is second. Especially claims of authority. Jesus is number one. Everything else is number two or down. But what Paul is saying, what I take him to be saying, is that authority is created with a purpose. That there is a good purpose for power. So let's look at those terms, thrones, dominions, rulers, and powers, because we need to look at them. I'll explain why in a little bit. First, thrones, Greek thronos, it's literal thrones. So this is talking about political power. In the case of Paul, he would be thinking of kings and princes and heads of city-states and that kind of thing, people who sit in literal thrones. Now, in our context, we think of people who wield political power, or maybe a chairperson of a board of directors or a CEO. Someone who has elected or unelected authority over others based on kind of where they sit. They sit in a big chair, they get to make the decisions. That is a thronos. Dominions, kuriotes, refer to owners. Or it would be people who have dominion over land in the ancient world. So people who are owners or landlords. People who have power based on what they own. What they have in their name. What capital they can bring to bear. However you want to look at it. Kuriotes. Landlords. Landowners. Rulers, in Greek arche, is interesting. Arche means kind of like a first thing or a beginning or a cause. And so I look at arche as possibly referring to leaders of various causes. Maybe not an elected or unelected position, maybe not leaders because of what they own, but they're leaders of a cause or a movement, people who have that kind of power and authority. And then last, powers, exousia, has to do with privilege and jurisdiction in terms of the definition of that word. So people whose power comes from the privilege of their position or their status, or people whose power comes because they have jurisdiction, like law enforcement, judges, the judicial branch, justice system, exousia. Historically, Christianity has reinterpreted those four categories of power to mean four categories of angels. And so you'll have tons of medieval manuscripts about how many wings one of the thrones have, or what the dominion has control over in the heavenly sphere. I think this was partly, possibly largely motivated by a desire to mollify people in power. Kind of be like, oh no, it's not about you. No. Angels. It's about angels. It's not about you, sir. No. Have no worries. Or, later on in Christian history, we were the ones sitting on the thrones. We were the ones who owned all the land. And so we didn't want this to be pointed at us. But I prefer to just look at it, to start simple, directly from the text, and think of this as referring to people with political power, landowners, the leaders of various causes, some we might like, some we might not. People who have privilege, and people who enforce laws. For me, that's a pretty straightforward reading. And when we pair this with Amos talking about ripeness and the reckoning that can come even to people who seem to have all the power, I think we're better able to begin to discern rightly about worldly authority, about the power that can exist between two people or two groups of people. I've said before in sermons, and it's worth pointing out, I think pretty regularly, at least based on conversations I have, that almost every horrible thing you can think of from human history has been legal. Almost every horrible thing that has been done with the support of those in authority. Whether we're talking slavery, whether we're talking genocide, the really horrific things have been ordered by people in authority, carried out by people following their orders and following that authority, and in most cases, legal with regard to who is doing it. Most awful, catastrophic, cataclysmic things have not been someone breaking the law. They have been someone following the law. They haven't been someone rejecting authority, it's been someone following the authorities. Now, this makes sense, right? If I have authority, if I have power, the good I can do is multiply. And the harm I can do is also multiply. If I have greater power, I can do greater good, I can do greater evil. Makes sense. And one would hope that with greater power, somebody would follow the Spiderman Rule. Can anyone think of does anyone know the Spiderman Rule? I want some hands from the other side. Say it out loud.
Great power comes great responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility. The Spiderman Rule is excellent. Almost no one in power follows the Spiderman Rule. Have you noticed that? It's rare to find someone who really behaves like their great power brings them greater responsibility. Usually it seems to bring them greater insulation, like that's what they're looking for. People in power want insulation from consequences to their actions. Maybe with greater power comes greater freedom to do whatever the heck I want to whoever I want. It's very rare that someone follows the Spiderman Rule, even though a third of us can name it from memory. Historically, Christianity itself has been brought to bear to justify terrible things. As I said, we are sometimes the ones who sit on the throne. We are sometimes the ones with the power, with the authority. And when we have had it, if you look at our history, we have not always followed the Spiderman Rule or God's rule or any other kind of rule. We behave just like anybody else with power. Only we've had the extra justification of our God language to back it up. Sometimes terrible things are justified because of law. Like I've had, this past couple weeks, a number of really depressing, frustrating conversations with people who seem to feel that any cruelty is justified if someone breaks the law. Well, what about this? Well, they broke the law. What about this? Well, they shouldn't have broke the law then. Like for some people, that's like a get out of moral reasoning free card. Like, oh, they broke the law, flush, done. Person has no status, not even concerned with them. Even if the law they broke wasn't a big one. Even if it was a misdemeanor, in some cases, that justifies terrible behavior. Think about it. How much easier is it to get elected if you're tough on crime? Like how many people would go to the ballot box and consciously vote for someone who ran on a platform of being soft on crime, soft on criminals, forgiving and merciful? Very few. Or how many people, as justification for how they use power, say, well, we're in favor of law and order? I mean, what's the other option? You run on a platform of chaos? Nobody would vote for that. Paul talks about being mature in Christ, being mature in our faith. I think that part of that Christian maturity, one way or another, is being able to discern power. Being able to discern the use of power in the world. It's a big issue. Sometimes we have it, and we need to figure out how to use it well. We're always under someone's authority, and we need to figure out that relationship. There are always people we have more power than, and we need to know, even unconsciously, when we're using them, and adjust. There are people who are powerless. We need to know our relationship to them. How do we help them? How do we empower them? All this takes discernment around power. Fortunately, we have a way to know whether power is legitimate or not. We have a way to discern whether authority is right. Because we know who the source of that authority is supposed to be. We know for whom that power was created. It had a purpose. And we know under whom all that authority rests. That nothing is ever the highest authority except for one thing. One person in this case. And it's relatively simple. When we look at the use of power by anyone for anything in any context, we can ask ourselves one question. Is that how Christ would use that power? Is that how Christ would use that power? If so, then that is a legitimate authority, deserving of our respect. And even, though it makes me twitch to say it, our obedience. Whew. Word troubles me. Maybe it shouldn't, but it does. But it's true. If we look at the use of power and we say that is how Christ would use that power, that is legitimate. We should obey. When we look at the use of power and we do not think that is how Christ would use that power, well then, that is not a legitimate power. And it does not deserve our obedience. Rather, it is a basket of summer fruit. It is right. And as Christians, we should act accordingly.